Have you ever noticed that your greatest mistakes usually happen right after your greatest wins? It's like being a professional who lands that huge promotion only to let their ego ruin their reputation 3 months later. There's something about the mountaintop that makes us dizzy. This is what happens with King Hezekiah. This man had just experienced the ultimate mic drop moment. He was the guy who prayed and watched a literal army vanish overnight. He was the guy who was sick. He was literally dying. And God didn't just heal him. He actually paused the solar system and moved the sun's shadow backward as a sign of his recovery. Hezekiah was at the absolute peak of his life. He was the poster child for God's favor. And then the doorbell rang. But it wasn't the enemy. It was a group of fans, important diplomats from the distant, mysterious empire of Babylon. They didn't come to fight, they came to admire him. And in that quiet, seemingly safe moment of flattery, Hezekiah faced a test more dangerous than any army he ever fought. Today, we're looking at 2 Chronicles chapter 32, verse 31. A verse that pulls back the curtain on what happens when the noise of the battle stops, when the miracle is over, and when God decides to see what you will do in His silence. In that verse, the Bible says, "But when envoys were sent by the rulers of Babylon to ask him about the miraculous sign that had occurred in the land, God left him to test him and to know everything that was in his heart." Before we can understand the test, we have to understand the man. Hezekiah was one of the good ones. He tore down idols, restored the temple, and trusted God when the Assyrian army was at his throat. But then, two things happened. First was the miracle. Hezekiah got sick and was near death. He prayed, and God gave him 15 more years of life, even moving the sun's shadow backward as a sign. The next comes the visitors. Babylon, at the time a rising power, heard about this sign and sent envoys to Jerusalem. Hezekiah had a choice. He could have talked about the God who heals and the God who moves the sun. Instead, the Bible tells us he showed the Babylonians his silver, his gold, his weapons, and his spice sheds. He showed off the gifts, but he forgot about the giver. When we break down the verse, it says God left him to test him. Does God leave people? We need to look at three key phrases here. First, God left him. This does not mean that God took away his love or his presence. It means he withdrew the perceptible sense of his guidance. He stopped, whispering in Hezekiah's ear for a moment to see which direction Hezekiah would walk on his own. The verse also says to test him. In Hebrew, this testing is like the refining of metal. It's not meant to make you fail. It's meant to show you what you're actually made of. The verse also says to know everything that was in his heart. This isn't for God's information. God is all-knowing. But it is for Hezekiah's information. Hezekiah needed to see that under his righteous king exterior, there was still a root of pride that loved the admiration of men more than the glory of God. So what does this lesson mean for us today? How do we apply this 2,700-year-old test to our lives? First, we have to know the danger of the post-victory season. We usually expect tests to come during a crisis, but Hezekiah wasn't tested during the war, he was tested during the peace. We need to watch our hearts when things are not going well, and when things are going well. We are often more spiritually safe when we are desperate for God than when we are comfortable in our own successes. Another lesson we also need to remember is that God uses silence as a tool. Have you ever felt like God is silent? It might not be a punishment. It might actually be a test of your spiritual maturity. When you don't feel a spiritual high or a clear direction, fall back on what you already know is true. Character is what you do when you don't feel God's immediate presence watching over your shoulder. We should also be aware of self-glorification. Hezekiah showed his treasures to impress the world. He wanted Babylonians to think, "Wow, Hezekiah is so powerful," rather than, "Wow, Hezekiah's God is so powerful." When people compliment your career, your family, or your talents, do you usually take the credit, or do you point towards the source? The treasures in your life are platforms for God's glory, not monuments to your own ego. As we close, let's remember that even though Hezekiah failed this specific test of pride, he is still remembered as a king who trusted in the Lord. Let's keep in mind that God's tests are meant to refine us, not define us. May the Lord keep you in the seasons of plenty, just as He kept you in the seasons of want. May you have the wisdom to recognize His hand in your successes and the humility to give Him the glory when the world is watching. Thank you for listening with us today. I hope that you will share this message to your loved ones who need the encouragement. And we will see you again next week for another Bible devotional. God bless you.